Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, and welcome to Prog Chattery 777. We're talking about Primus, and we've made it to their 7th studio album. This was released in 2011, and it's called Green Naugahyde. This is a fantastic album. This is kind of like Primus's big comeback album, if you like. Prior to this, it had been a very long time since any new Primus music had been released. The last full-length studio album that was released before this was Anti-Pop, all the way back in 1999. And then shortly after that album, the band broke up for a couple of years, got back together in 2003. They recorded a few songs for a short EP that was called Animals Should Not Try to Act Like People. I did another video where I talked about that. It's a fantastic, fantastic run of songs. You should definitely check that out. And then throughout the 2000s decade, you know, they kind of sporadically toured in between Les Claypool's solo projects, but there was certainly no indication that they were going to make a new album. That is until sometime around 2010, maybe 2009, where Les Claypool, of course singer and bass player for Primus, and Larry Lalonde, the long-standing guitar player for Primus, expressed interest in a new Primus album. Their drummer at the time, Tim Alexander, was not quite as enthused for the project, so they replaced Tim Alexander with a bloke named Jay Lane to complete the Primus lineup for this album. And it's kind of a funny Primus lineup, Les Claypool, Larry Lalonde, and Jay Lane, because to us fans it's like, oh wow, new Primus lineup, they've got a new drummer, that's really cool. Of course that's not the case, because Jay Lane was actually the Primus drummer back in the mid to late 80s, and Tim Alexander had replaced Jay Lane just prior to the recording of Frizzle Fry. So it's kind of like a new old lineup. But it's really cool because even though they got their old drummer back for this album, for us fans, we get to hear Jay Lane's contribution to Primus for the very first time. And I think on this album, I think Jay Lane steals the show. His drumming is absolutely fantastic. I mean, all the Primus drummers are wonderful in their own way, but there's something special about Jay Lane's playing. It might be just that this is the only Primus album that features Jay Lane, so it has that unique quality about it. But he is just a monster drummer. I mean, you listen to you know, all the little rolls that he throws out on the hi-hat and on the bells and whatnot, and he's just fantastic. And it's kind of a funny thing with Primus drummers. It's almost like each drummer for Primus makes, you know, that's how you differentiate different Primus eras. And each drummer almost kind of navigates or, you know, steers Primus in a different direction. Obviously, you know, the Tim Alexander Primus, you know, throughout the 90s, they were gradually working their way towards that kind of progressive, psychedelic, heavy atmospheric kind of a thing. And that's really cool. But then as soon as they got Brian Mantia on board, the sound changed a little bit, get a little simpler with Brown Album and Anti-Pop. And then when they got back together in 2003 with Tim Alexander to do Animals Should Not Try to Act Like People, it was almost like they picked up right where they left off from the last Tim Alexander album, which was Tales from the Punch Bowl. So having a third drummer on this album just makes it all the more unique. There's no other Primus album that quite sounds like this one. That having been said, it ticks all of the Primus boxes. All of the things that must be a part of Primus to make it Primus are definitely present on this album. But yeah, it is definitely quite cool. I mean, it's nothing quite like, it's certainly not like that psychedelic thing that the Tim Alexander Primus had been doing. It doesn't. There's less of that. There's bits of it, and it's also not quite as straight ahead and simplified as Brown Album. It's kind of it's a cool kind of in between. I would say on the whole, the sound has been refined quite a bit. I think particularly with Les Claypool and Larry Lalonde, I think they hold back a fair bit more on this album than certain other albums, which is great for Jay Lane because it gives him a lot more room to mess around and strut his stuff the way that he does. Lyrically, it's also quite interesting. I would say there's probably more social commentary and satire on this album than any other Primus album. Obviously, there's always been social commentary. There's always been, you know, satire. That's you know, a mainstay of Primus. But I think, you know, there just seems to be a lot of it on this album. I'm not sure why I think that. You know, maybe it might just be me. I mean, there might be an equal amount of the satirical stuff on all the other stuff, but I don't know, maybe the message is a little bit clearer on this album, which is quite interesting. What else was I going to say? I'm not too sure, so I'll just start talking about the tracks then. We'll just go straight into it. Side 1, or most people probably have this on CD. The album opens with a song called Prelude to a Crawl. This is just a little intro, but I really like it actually. It's just kind of got that low rumbly bass tones and a little melodic line that Claypool plays, all just on the bass, a little bass solo. But I love those little that little melodic lick he plays, just that doom doom doom. It feels like a comeback album. You know, you put the record on and you say, oh wow, Primus is coming, which is really cool. Very short little intro, goes straight into the first actual song, which is Hennepin Crawler. And right away you hear that more direct sound, I think. You know, it's still a crazy riff, a fast, kind of frenetic riff, but I mean, it's nothing like DMV or Jerry Was a Race Car Driver. There's no, you know, over-the-top techniques on much of any of this album, actually. It's much more, you know, I don't want to say simplified, but it's a little more straight ahead, more refined. That's what I said. But yeah, Hennepin Crawler is a great riff. Love that boom, down, down. And those little rests that pop up, that's where Jay Lane manages to fill the space, and you hear that those crazy hi-hat rolls that I was talking about. Just crazy. Great little bit of you know, classic Claypool speaking through the megaphone type vocals. I love his whole you get the pie in the sky. I like that whole section. Quite cool. Definitely not the best on the album, but it serves as a cool opener, and you know, certainly makes us aware that we're listening to Primus. Then we make it to track 3, which is Last Salmon Man. This, I think, is definitely the best song on the album for me. It's very anthemic. It has that classic Larry Lalonde thing, that kind of atmospheric color wash. I love that. Really cool. And of course, this is also Fisherman's Chronicles Part 4. Talking about Last Salmon Man, it's obviously about a fisherman. It's definitely got the environmental theme. So it's about, well, you know, a fishing family approaching their youngest, saying, "You might be the last salmon man," because the salmon are all leaving the river. But yeah, I mean, that slightly more straight ahead sound that I'm talking about. You know, of course, Claypool is still playing the big chunky chords, but you know, you know, that is, you know, in essence, a fairly simple riff. He's still throwing lots of wild techniques in there. Don't get me wrong, but you know, it's nice to hear them, you know, comfortable with doing something a little more straight ahead. Of course, this is one of the psychedelic moments, actually, one of the few on the album. Towards the middle, it kind of goes into that jam, and like live, they take it into much more astronomical heights. But great little bass solo there, classic Claypool. I love the goofy kind of interlude too. I love that. That's classic. That's what I was gonna say before. That's the interesting thing with this Primus album is, you know, it has all of that idiosyncratic, surreal, almost cartoony Primus quality, but it's also, you know, seen through the lens of experience, right? You know, Les Claypool and them they're no longer spring chickens, right? I mean, you could imagine, you know, a bunch of really talented guys in their 20s, you know, doing silly songs played really well. But it's great to see how they can maintain that surreal, cartoony quality and still make, you know, a mature record. I would say this is, you know, mature Primus. So that's an interesting point that I threw right in the middle of my track discussions. So yeah, end of the day, track 3, Last Salmon Man, is a great song, and I think it's my favorite on the album. Then we get to track 4, which is Eternal Consumption Engine. This is a great little vignette. Again, it's a classic Primus thing. They have those, you know, short songs. I think this was written by Larry Lalonde, actually. Get a nice little bit of stand-up bass playing in there that, you know, and very, very hilarious Claypool singing, "Everything nowadays is made in China." Great little piece. Again, it's just a vignette, you know, it's like a minute and a half or something like that, but it is very Primus, and it certainly belongs on the album. It moves the album along quite nicely. That takes us to track 5, which is "Tragedy Is A Comin'." Now this, I think, was the first single that was released on the album. I think this is a single. And I remember when I first heard it, it's kind of the same reaction that I have now. Is, wow, that is very straight ahead. It's probably might be Primus at their most funky. You know, they've all kind of got that stomp, but you know, it's probably Jay Lane's drumming that brings that to it. But you know, it is kind of a more straight up Primus song. If there is any, you know, moment where I guess like the surrealism or the cartooniness or whatever it is that you want to call it, idiosyncratic Primus thing, it does seem, you know, quite toned down here, and they're not really going out of their way to make the song as Primus-y as possible. It's just a straight up, really good, bouncy song. Funny video too with Les Claypool dressed up as the lobster. There's the Primus-iness, but the song itself is you know, really well put together, straight up song. Could have been a jam. I mean, it probably just came out of a jam and then, you know, throw on the lyrics. There's a little live section in the middle too, which is cool. A little bass solo that was probably improvised somewhere, and then after it was on the album, I'm sure he's done that same thing every time they've played it. I don't know. I haven't seen them. But yeah, Tragedy Is Coming. Excellent track. Great bit of straight up rock. Funky rock. Takes us to track 6, "Eyes of the Squirrel." This is a funny one. A really good song. I really like it, and it's probably one of the only songs on the album where I would say it's not necessarily suited to Jay Lane's drumming. Of course, he does a phenomenal job of it. You know, he's got that crazy cluster of triplets on the toms and. You know, he's still hitting a shitload of those drums and the hi-hats, but the song itself, I think, is probably more suited to Tim Alexander's drumming. I would love to see Primus do this song with Tim Alexander on the drums. You know, those 16th note triplets that Tim Alexander does so well. I would see, you know, it just fits this song so well. Again, nothing against Jay Lane's performance, because it is a phenomenal performance, and I could only wish to play that well in my wildest dreams. But it still feels like a Tim Alexander song. Again, a bit of social commentary, "Eyes of the Squirrel." It's a funny title, but I think it's just talking about, you know, government spying on its citizens and all that drama, all that intrigue or whatever. So it's a good song. Not necessarily one of my favorites on the album, but it is good. We make our way to track 7. We got another album highlight here. "Jilly's on Smack." Very dark song. Still loaded with all, you know, Claypool's eccentric, you know, writing styles and whatnot. But obviously, it's about someone who had died of a heroin overdose. So it's dark, even though you know, "You would not be coming back for the holidays." You know, it's still serious. It's goofy, but it's serious. And I think, you know, Primus is one of the few bands that can do that, actually. I mean, and maybe it's more apparent here, because like I said, this is the more mature, refined Primus type album. But it's very interesting, and "Jilly's on Smack" is an excellent example of a song that, you know, on the exterior is, you know, it's still creepy, but I mean, there's this weird combination they do so well. They can blend surreal and serious, and goofy and serious so very well. That's a rare thing. I mean, Zappa is certainly an example where he was able to do that. But yeah, it's a great song. It's got the stand-up bass, classic Claypool stand-up. Great. I love Larry's guitar line too. That kind of gnarly arpeggiated line, and like I said, the way the stand-up bass kind of rolls on top of it is just fantastic. Definitely an album highlight for me. Move on to track 8 from there, "Lee Van Cleef." This is another one of the singles on the album. And you know, what a great, simple little song. You know, it shows that, you know, Primus isn't always all about, you know, DMV or Tommy the Cat, where it's just, you know, it's all about the chops. There's obviously lots of chops on Lee Van Cleef, but it's at its core, it's just a really great, simple, groovy little song. You know, I almost think of it. It's a little bit like White on His Big Brown Beaver, I guess, but with less crazy chops. You know, it's just all about that groove. I love that little descending line too. It's one of those things that would be cliche for everyone except Primus. Primus can get away with it. But great little song. It's a tribute to, of course, Lee Van Cleef, and saying that, yes, while there is only one Clint Eastwood, there's still always only one Lee Van Cleef as well. Yeah, horrendously fun song. Lots of fun. One of my favorites on the album. Very groovy. Takes us to track 9, Moron TV. Pretty straight ahead social satire type song. Probably my least favorite on the album. There's a bit of a genericness to it, you know, that riff. Ding, 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 ding. You know, a little bit standard. Still good though, you know. It still ticks the boxes, but it never really did anything for me personally. Every album's got to have at least one track like that. Then as we move towards the end of the album, we get another one of those little vignettes. We get The Green Ranger, which I presume is this guy. This guy must be the Green Ranger. It's not, I don't like it quite as much as Eternal Consumption Engine, but again, it's a vignette. It's only like a minute and a half, so it's a nice little bit of sieg to get to the final little blast of the album. It's got that steady, constantly held, imposing and freaky note on the stand-up bass. But yeah, cool stuff, but not extremely cool. However, track 11 I think is extremely cool. HOINFODAMAN. This is a great song. I love the Larry riff. I love that intro. And then when Claypool and Lane join in, it's a fantastic track. Well syncopated. I really dig it. Very funny lyrics too. You know, talking about commercialism and well, hoeing for the man. There's some funny lyrics in there. I don't know why. I always end up laughing at. Damn, that's a juicy burger. I do like burgers, so it makes me crave burgers. He's hoeing for the man. But yeah, great track. One of the highlights for me, actually. I really like Hoeing for the Man. Don't take that the way it sounded. I like that track. And then we get track 12. This is kind of the actual finale of the album, Extinction Burst. Another really great track. Very frenzied. It's a little similar to Hennepin Crawler, but probably a little faster and a little more frantic. Quite cool. The song itself kind of like blasts, you know, at you and away from you very quickly, but then it goes into a really cool instrumental section towards the end that really reminds me of some like classic, you know, 70s fusion stuff like Brand X or something. Diddle-a-ding, 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 like those fast, you know, choppy little sections are just fantastic, and again, obviously great performances by the entire band. Great way to finish off the album. But of course, track 13, in classic Primus fashion, we got a short little reprise of Last Salmon Man played on an accordion, and with the weird Claypool choir in the background there. And I love its inclusion, though. I love that they bring Salmon Man at the very end. They bring the Last Salmon Man back once again. Like I said, Last Salmon Man for me is the highlight of the album. Like, it's a very anthemic piece, and hearing it again just as the album fades out, it just wraps everything up so nicely, and you feel like you've had a proper, complete listening experience, which is what an album ought to do. Am I right? So I think, yeah, on that note, I think I've successfully rambled on about this album by Primus, Green Naugahyde. released in 2011, and it was their big comeback album. Of course, they released the Chocolate Factory after this, and as I record this right now, I'm in very, very antsy anticipation of their 9th studio album, The Desaturating 7, and that's going to be coming out in a couple of weeks, so I'm sure I'll be doing a video about that when that comes out. But you can stay tuned here for the next Primus album, which will be Primus and the Chocolate Factory. Lots of fun. So until then, thank you very much for tuning in. Don't forget to like and subscribe and all the rest of it, and you will see me in the future. Take care.